The morning I looked out my back door and saw the tire tracks cutting through the frost, I had to grab the doorframe just to keep myself standing. There were two of them. Two long, dark lines pressed into the white, running from the gate at the far end of my property all the way toward the woodshed. Whoever had driven in had come in slow, careful, like they knew exactly where they were going and didn't want to make noise doing it. I stood there in my socks on the cold linoleum, holding my coffee, and I thought about what the old man at the pharmacy had said to me the evening before. After your daughter-in-law leaves tomorrow, don't shovel the back path. I hadn't understood it then. I'd smiled at him the way you smile at someone whose medication you're not sure is working. But I hadn't shoveled, and now I was looking at the proof of why he'd said it. If I had gone out there with my shovel at 6 in the morning, the way I always do, the way everyone on my street knows I always do, those tracks would have been gone before the sun came up. Someone had counted on that. Let me go back to the beginning, because none of this makes sense without it. My name is Harold. I'm 67 years old. I spent 31 years working maintenance for the Transit Authority in Hamilton, Ontario, and when I retired I took the pension, sold the house my ex-wife and I had shared for 22 years, and bought a small property just outside Ancaster. It's not much, about 3 acres, a bungalow built in the 70s, a woodshed, a detached garage, and a backfield that I've let go wild because I'm 67 and I'm not farming anything. But it's mine. I paid for it myself, I fixed it up myself, and after the divorce and everything that came with it, it felt like the first thing in a long time that was just mine. My son, I'll call him my son because that's what he is, and I'm not going to dance around it. He's 41. His name is Marcus. He works in logistics, which means he schedules things and emails people, and makes a salary I never came close to in my whole career, and that's fine. I'm proud of him. I was proud of him. His wife, I'll call her my daughter-in-law, which is what she was until recently. Her name is Tara. She and Marcus have been married for 9 years. They have a daughter, my granddaughter, who just turned 7, and who I would walk through fire for. Her name is Wren, and she is the reason I held my tongue for as long as I did. Tara never liked me. I want to be careful here, because I know how that sounds coming from a father-in-law. Every father-in-law thinks the daughter-in-law doesn't like him, but this wasn't about Christmas gifts, or how I loaded the dishwasher. Tara had a way of looking at things and calculating their value very quickly, and what she calculated when she looked at me was that I didn't have much. I was a retired transit worker with a modest pension and a small property outside the city. I wasn't going to leave Marcus anything that would change his life. I was an obligation, and she treated me like one. It started small, the way it always does. I'd be invited to dinner and then the invitation would get moved or forgotten. I'd call Marcus on a Sunday and he'd seem distracted, like he was answering questions from someone nearby. When Wren started school, I found out about the first day from a photo Marcus posted online. I hadn't been told. When I mentioned it, Marcus said they'd just been busy. Tara, in the background, said nothing. Then, about 14 months ago, Marcus came to see me alone. He sat at my kitchen table, and he told me he was in trouble. Not criminal trouble, financial trouble. He and Tara had stretched themselves buying a house in Waterdown. A big house, the kind of house that made sense when interest rates were where they were, and didn't make as much sense anymore. The mortgage renewal had come in at a rate that was eating them alive, and they had a line of credit on top of it. And Tara's car had needed a major repair, and Marcus had missed a bonus he'd been counting on. He laid it all out on my table like a man confessing. He looked exhausted. He looked like my son. I asked him how much they needed. He said $60,000. I sat with that number for a moment. $60,000 was most of what I had in my TFSA outside the house. It was the money I'd been careful with, that I'd not touched, that I'd thought of as a buffer against whatever gets harder as you get older. I said I'd think about it. I didn't say no. I want to be clear about that. I didn't say no, and I wasn't trying to punish him. I just needed a few days to think about whether I could do it and what it would mean for me. I'm 67. I don't have another 30 years of earning ahead of me. $60,000 is a different thing for me than it is for a 41-year-old in logistics. Marcus seemed to understand that. He thanked me, he hugged me in the doorway, and he drove back to Waterdown. What happened next I only pieced together later. Tara, apparently, did not take the waiting well. From what Marcus eventually told me, and he told me everything, eventually, When it was all over, she had decided that if I wasn't going to help them voluntarily, there was another way to get what they needed. The property I was sitting on outside Ancaster had gone up considerably in value since I'd bought it. Not mansion money, but real money, enough to matter, and Tara had started doing research. She'd found out that if a person could be declared unable to manage their own financial affairs, if there was a documented pattern of confusion, erratic behavior, poor judgment, a family member could apply to become their legal guardian. She'd talked to someone, I don't know who, a friend of a friend, someone who knew someone. She'd started making notes. I didn't know any of this. I was just living my life, feeding the birds off the back deck, doing my woodworking in the garage, driving into Hamilton every couple of weeks to have lunch with my old colleague from the Transit Authority, a man named Winston who'd retired 2 years before me. Life was quiet. I was fine. The first strange thing happened in October. I went to refill my blood pressure prescription at the pharmacy on Garner Road, the one I'd been going to for 4 years. When I got to the counter, the pharmacist, a young woman I didn't know, someone new, told me my prescription had already been filled that week. I told her that wasn't possible. I hadn't been in. She showed me the record. The prescription had been filled 2 days earlier and picked up. My name, my date of birth, my health card number. I asked her who had picked it up. She said she couldn't tell me that. She looked uncomfortable. I told her I was the patient, and I had a right to know, and she said she'd have to speak to the pharmacist on duty and ask me to wait. While I was waiting, the man ahead of me in the other line, older than me, maybe 75, wearing a barn coat and one of those plaid caps that old men wear, turned around and looked at me. He'd clearly heard the whole exchange. He said quietly, "Someone's trying to make you look confused." I stared at him. He said, "It's happened before, to other people. They file things, call your doctor's office, build a paper trail. You start to look like you can't keep track." He nodded toward the counter. "This is how it starts." I didn't know what to say. I asked him how he knew. He said he'd seen it done to his brother 15 years ago, by people who wanted what his brother had. He said his brother hadn't caught it in time. The pharmacist came back and told me the situation would be flagged and documented, and that I should contact my doctor. I thanked her. When I turned back, the old man was gone. I hadn't even seen him leave. I don't know his name. I never saw him again. But I thought about what he'd said all the way home, and by the time I got to my driveway, I had a very specific cold feeling in my chest. I called my doctor's office the next morning. I asked them if anyone had contacted them recently about my mental state, my memory, anything like that. The receptionist put me on hold for a long time. When she came back, she said that the office had received a call the previous month from someone identifying themselves as a family member with concerns about my ability to live independently. She said they'd been told to submit anything in writing and that nothing had been acted on. Family member. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time. Then I called a lawyer. Not a family friend, not someone who knew Marcus and Tara. A stranger I found online, a woman in Hamilton who specialized in elder law. I won't say her name, but she was sharp and she was direct, and within 20 minutes of me explaining what I knew, she told me this was not an unusual pattern and that there were things I could do. The first thing she told me to do was get everything documented. The pharmacy incident, the call to my doctor's office, dates and times. She told me to set up a financial power of attorney, not with Marcus, with Winston, my old colleague, while I was clearly capable of doing so that if anyone tried to challenge my competency down the road, there would be a legally documented record of a competent person making careful decisions. She told me not to mention this to Marcus or Tara. She told me to act normal. I am not by nature an actor, but I am stubborn and I am patient, and I spent 31 years doing a job that required paying attention to small things. So I did what she said. November came. Marcus called a few times and our conversations were normal enough. He asked once, carefully, whether I'd thought any more about the loan. I said I was still thinking. He said okay. Tara called once, which she almost never did. She asked how I was doing in a voice that was almost too warm, the way you speak to someone you're being observed speaking to. I said I was fine. I asked after Ren. She said Ren was great. The call lasted 4 minutes. The week before Christmas, Marcus told me they were going to visit his mother for the holidays, my ex-wife, who lives in Barrie now, and that they'd try to come see me in the new year. I said of course. Ren got on the phone and told me she'd made me a card, and Marcus was going to mail it. I told her I couldn't wait. After I hung up, I sat in my living room in the dark for a while. It was 2 days after Christmas when Tara called again. She said she and Marcus had been talking, and that they were worried about me being out there on my own in the winter. She said the property was a lot for one person to manage. She said, and this is the part I made myself memorize. She said that they'd been speaking to someone at a seniors resource center who had suggested that sometimes the most loving thing a family can do is help a parent transition to something more manageable before there's a crisis. She said it so carefully, like she'd practiced it. I said I appreciated her concern. I said I'd think about it. I said the same thing I'd said to Marcus about the money, because I needed time, and because I'd learned that those 4 words, "I'll think about it," bought me exactly what I needed. After I hung up, I called my lawyer. She said we needed to move faster. We spent the first 2 weeks of January filing the power of attorney paperwork, getting it witnessed and notarized and registered. My lawyer also suggested I have a full cognitive assessment done through my family doctor, not because anyone had formally challenged my competency, but so that when they did, there would be a professional medical evaluation on record showing that at this specific point in time I was entirely capable. My doctor agreed. We scheduled it. The assessment was on a Thursday afternoon in mid-January. The following Tuesday, Marcus called and said he and Tara were going to drive out on the weekend to see me and talk. He said it was important. His voice was the voice of someone who had been coached on what to say and was trying to remember it. I said that would be fine. Saturday would be great. That Friday evening, I drove to the pharmacy on Garner Road to pick up a refill, the real refill, the one I'd arranged with the pharmacist directly after the October incident. It was getting dark by the time I got there, and the parking lot was nearly empty. There was an older man coming out as I was going in, different from the man in October, heavyset, white hair, moving slowly. He was searching his coat pockets and looking frustrated. I held the door. He stopped and looked up. He was trying to remember if he'd left something at the counter. I told him I'd ask for him if he wanted to come back in. He said he thought he'd left his gloves. We went back in together, and I asked the staff, and sure enough, there was a pair of brown work gloves behind the counter. He was so relieved you'd have thought I'd found something worth far more than gloves. He shook my hand with both of his and thanked me. He said I didn't have to do that. I said it was nothing. He asked if I was picking something up. I said yes, blood pressure medication. He nodded. He said he had the same prescription, more or less. He said getting old was a full-time job. I laughed. He laughed. Then, as he was pulling on his gloves and heading for the door, he stopped. He turned around and he looked at me for a moment, like he was trying to decide something. He said, "You've got family coming this weekend?" I said, "Yes, my son and daughter-in-law." He nodded slowly. Then he said, "After they leave, don't shovel your back path." I blinked. "I'm sorry?" He said it again, the same words. "After they leave, don't shovel the back path." He said it the way you say something you mean very precisely, not as a suggestion. Then he nodded once more, pulled his cap down, and walked out to the parking lot. I stood there at the pharmacy counter holding my paper bag, and I thought, this city is full of unusual people, but I didn't shovel the path. Saturday came. Marcus arrived at noon. Tara was in the passenger seat, which I noted because she usually drives when they come out here. She doesn't trust Marcus's parking on narrow roads. She's told me this. But she was in the passenger seat, and Marcus came in alone while she waited in the car. He sat at my kitchen table, and he was quiet for a moment before he spoke. Then he said that he and Tara had decided, together, that they thought it was time to talk about my long-term situation. He said the word situation very deliberately. He said they'd consulted with someone, he didn't say who, about the options available for people in my position. He said the property might be better managed as a trust, while I was still able to participate in the decisions. He said the word trust, the same way Tara had said the word transition. Carefully, with both hands, I let him finish. Then I told him quietly that I had something I needed to show him. I went to the kitchen drawer where I'd put the folder my lawyer had prepared. I set it on the table in front of him, and I let him open it himself. Inside was the power of attorney, signed and registered, assigning financial authority to Winston. Inside was the cognitive assessment from my doctor, dated 11 days ago, confirming full cognitive function. Inside was a letter from my lawyer outlining the documented incidents. The fraudulent prescription pickup in October, the call to my doctor's office, and stating that should any application be made regarding my competency or estate, all of this would be submitted as evidence of a coordinated pattern of manipulation. Marcus went very still. He read it slowly. I watched his face while he read. By the time he got to the end, whatever had been in his expression when he walked in, the prepared, coached look, was completely gone. What was left was something I recognized from when he was a child, when he was caught, when he knew it. He said, "Tara told me it was the right thing to do." I said, "I know." He said, "I thought you were struggling." She said you were struggling. She showed me things. I asked what things. He stopped. He thought about it. He said she made some calls. She told me the pharmacies had flagged concerns. She told me your doctor's office had reached out to her. I told him none of that was true. I told him what had actually happened, and what the paper trail actually showed, and who had made those calls, and who had picked up my prescription using my personal information that only someone close to me would have. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said, very quietly, "I didn't know she'd done that part." And I believed him. That was the hardest thing. I looked at my son at my kitchen table and I believed him, and it didn't make it better, but it changed what came next. He went out to the car and talked to Tara for a long time. I watched through the kitchen window, but I couldn't hear anything. At one point, she gestured broadly, and he held up his hand and she stopped. He came back inside alone. He told me Tara was going to go stay with her sister for a few days. He asked if he could stay the night. He said he wasn't ready to drive. I made dinner. I made the chicken stew I've been making since Marcus was 12 years old. We ate it at the kitchen table, and he talked. Really talked, for the first time in I don't know how long. He told me about the financial pressure, which I already knew, and about how Tara had started framing everything in terms of what would happen when I couldn't manage anymore, which had somehow, gradually, become a plan for what to do now. He said he hadn't let himself examine it too closely, because examining it meant admitting what it was. I told him I understood how that happens. That night I couldn't sleep, and around 2 in the morning, I got up and went to the back door and looked out at the property. And there they were, 2 sets of tire tracks pressed into the frost, running in from the gate and stopping near the woodshed. Boot prints in the soft ground beside them, 2 sets leading to the shed and back. The door of the shed was closed the way I always leave it, but there was something slightly off about the latch. It was down but not fully seated, the way it looks when someone has opened it and pulled it shut behind them without knowing which way the latch catches. Someone had been on my property while Marcus and I were eating dinner. I didn't wake Marcus. I took photos on my phone, 10, 12 photos, the tracks and the boot prints and the latch and the line of the gate in the frost. I sent them to my lawyer that night with a timestamp. In the morning I showed Marcus. He stood at the back door and looked out at the yard, and he didn't say anything for a long time. Then he asked me to send him the photos. I don't know the full details of what Marcus said to Tara in the days that followed. He's told me some of it, and not all of it, and I've decided that's appropriate. There are things between a husband and wife that a father doesn't need to know. What I know is that she eventually admitted, when confronted with what my lawyer had compiled, that she had orchestrated the prescription pickup and the call to the doctor's office, and that the people in my backyard on Saturday night had been there to look for anything she could use. Documents, medication, anything that could support the picture she was trying to build. She found nothing because there was nothing. I am 67 years old and I keep my paperwork in a filing cabinet and my medication in the cabinet above the bathroom sink, and my mind is, for now, my own. Marcus and Tara separated in February. I'm not going to say I'm happy about it, because Ren is 7 years old. And happiness isn't the right word for anything that makes a 7-year-old's life harder. But Marcus is renting a place in Hamilton, not far from where I used to work, and Ren spends weekends with him, and she spent last Saturday afternoon at my kitchen table, painting rocks she'd collected from the back field. I made hot chocolate, and I let her put in her own marshmallows, and she put in approximately 17 of them, and I didn't say a word. I did go back to the pharmacy on Garner Road, a few weeks after everything came out. I asked the staff if they knew an older man, heavy-set, white hair, brown work gloves, used to fill a blood pressure prescription there. They looked at each other. One of them said there were a lot of older men who fit that description. I said I suppose there were. I'm not going to pretend I fully understand what happened at that pharmacy on a Friday night in January. I don't know how he knew. I don't know what he saw or guessed or overheard. I know that he told me not to do the one thing that would have erased the evidence I needed, and that he said it in the tone of someone who meant it, and then he walked out into the parking lot, and I never saw him again. I paid for his gloves back, in a way. He paid me back in the only currency that mattered. This past Sunday, I got up early and made a pot of coffee, and went out to the back steps with a mug and just sat there for a while. The field was coming back after the winter. The grass pale yellow still, but with the green underneath starting to push through. The birds were back at the feeder. The woodshed door was latched the way I like it. I'm 67 years old. I live on a small property outside Ancaster that's mine and that I paid for myself. I have a son who is trying to figure out who he is without someone telling him what to think. I have a granddaughter who puts 17 marshmallows in her hot chocolate and grins at me while she does it. I didn't shovel the back path. And because I didn't, I still have a life to come home to.